Hi guys, welcome to Drona. In today's session, I am going to revise the concept of supply. So supply under GST concern, in this chapter we are going to discuss section 7 and section 8 of the GST Act. The first section 7 subsection 1 clause A, all forms of the supply of the good or services for a consideration by a person in the course or furtherance of the business would amount to a supply. That means to become any transaction as a supply, first of all there should be a supply of the good or service, and such supply should be made for a consideration, and supply should be made in the course or furtherance of the business, and supply should be made by a taxable person, and finally it should be a taxable supply. So on satisfying of all these 5 conditions, a transaction will become supply, right? All such concept we discussed elaborately in section 7 subsection 1 clause A, out of which the first one, there should be a supply of the good or service. First of all forms of the supply is concerned: barter, exchange, license, lease, rentals, etc. Next, good means every kind of movable property excludes money and securities, but include actionable claims and growing crop and gross, which are agreed to be separated under the contract of the supply or before to the supply. And next, service means anything other than good, but excludes money and securities, and includes activities in relating to use of money and conversion of one form of currency or denomination to another form of currency or denomination for which a separate consideration is charged. It is called service. So that is the first one. And second one, supply should be made for a consideration. Considerations are 4 forms of the considerations. The first one, consideration may be in money, consideration may be in kind, and consideration may be monetary value of any act, and the fourth one, forbearance of an act. And next, the third one, supply should be made in the course or furtherance of the business. That is nothing but by referring to the transaction, you should be in a position to say that such transaction has been taken place in commercial parlance. And the fourth one, supply should be made by a taxable person. Taxable person means the person who is liable for obtaining of the registration or voluntarily obtain the registration. Such person is called taxable person. And next, taxable supply means the supply of the good or service which is liable to tax under the GST Act. It is known as taxable supply. Now, on satisfying of all these 5 transactions or 5 conditions, a transaction will become a supply as per section 7 subsection 1 clause A. And now we are going to start with section 7(1)(b). 7(1)(b) concern import of service for a consideration whether or not in the course or furtherance of the business it would amount to a supply. First of all, in India, if any transaction want to become a supply, first of all there should be a furtherance of the business. Without having a furtherance of the business, we cannot say that a supply concept. But one and only the exception to the furtherance of the business, it is import of service for a consideration. That means for import of service, even if there is no furtherance of the business, it will become a supply. Suppose take an example, if you are downloading any song through Google and you are making a payment, it may not be in the course or furtherance of the business, but still it will become supply. And next, C, 7 subsection 1 clause C, the activities or transactions which are given under the schedule 1, if those are transacted even for without consideration, it would amount to a supply. Now in schedule 1, 4 transactions are covered. Number 1, permanent transfer or disposal of the business asset. Suppose if you are purchasing any good and you are availing input tax credit on it, it will become a business asset. And a business asset, if you are using after using for the business, and if you are removing such good as it is, or as a second-handed good, or as a free of gift, that is free of cost, it will become a supply even if there is no consideration. And the second one concern transaction between related or distinct persons. If any transaction taking place in between related or distinct persons for without consideration, it would amount to a supply. And the third one, principal to an agent, where goods are supplied from principal to an agent, even for without consideration, it will become a supply, provided we have to ensure whether agent issuing invoice in his own name or in the name of the principal. But where agent issuing invoice in the name of the principal, there we should not say that it is as a supply. Reason, just is acting as an agent. But where agent issuing invoice in his own name, in such a situation, the transaction taking place in between the principal and agent for without consideration, it will become supply. And the fourth transaction concern, import of service in between related or distinct persons in the course or furtherance of the business. Even if there is no consideration, it will become supply. Suppose import of service undima, consideration లేదు, కానీ ఇంపోర్టర్ అండ్ ఎక్స్పోర్టర్ ఎవరు అంటే రిలేటెడ్ పర్సన్స్, అండ్ ఫర్దరెన్స్ ఆఫ్ ది బిజినెస్ కూడా ఉంది, అలాంటప్పుడు ఆ ట్రాన్సాక్షన్ కూడా సప్లై అవుతుందమ్మా. సో యాజ్ పర్ 7(1)(c), these are the 4 transactions. Even if there is no consideration, it will become a supply. And next, section 7 subsection 1A concern, it will give an explanation about whether a transaction has a supply of the good or service. Just if you go through all the transactions, easily you can understand whether a transaction is the supply of the good or service. Out of which, just I will explain 2 concepts. The first one, suppose hire purchase transaction. If you are purchasing good today itself, but the title will be transferred only on payment of the lost consideration, but still we have to consider it is as a supply of the good. And next, composite supply. Supply of the food or beverages for human consumption. Actually, it is one of the composite supply. Apart from the delivery of the service, good also be delivered. But for the purpose of the GST Act, we have to presume as per Schedule 2, it is as a supply of the service. So likewise, you can identify various transactions in Section 7, subsection 1A, read with Schedule 2. And next, Section 7, subsection 2, out of which Schedule 3. Schedule 3, the matters which are given under the Schedule 3, if those are transacted even for without consideration, the transactions which are specified in Schedule 3, neither a supply of the good and nor a supply of the service. That means the transactions which are covered under the Schedule 3, generally you may identify those transactions as a supply of the good or service, generally. But for the purpose of the GST Act, those transactions are neither a supply of the good and nor a supply of the services. Out of which the first transaction, transaction in between employer and employee, that is nothing but on rendering of the services by the employee, employer will provide a salary. Is it right? It is outside the ambit of the GST. Reason, this is the first transaction which is covered under the Schedule 3, that is native list. And the second transaction concerned services provided by the tribunal, district court, high court or supreme court. On providing of the service, consideration may be received in the form of the non-judicial stamp. It is neither a supply of the good and nor a supply of the service. And the third one, functions entrusted to the MPs, MLAs, ward members, panchayat members, and where a person getting a position by virtue of the constitution or and where a person is a member or a chairperson in a committee which is constituted by the CGSD or local authority, and these persons are rendering services for prosperity and development of the country, and whatever the remuneration they are getting, it is neither a supply of the good and nor a supply of the service. And the fourth one, services in relation to the funeral, burial, crematorium, mortuary services, neither a supply of the good and nor a supply of the service. And next one, sale of land and building. As we know, neither a supply of the good and nor a supply of the service. But one thing you have to remember, where the land and building given on rental or lease basis, it will become a supply of the service. And the last one, actionable claim. Actionable claim we discussed as a good, but it is neither a supply of the good nor a supply of the service. But one thing, the lottery, betting, gambling, only these three elements will become supply of the good, and the remaining promissory note, bill of exchange, check, these elements won't be treated as a supply of the good or service, being it is covered under the negative list. And apart from that, one more thing we can say that the liquor license granted by the state government, it is neither a supply of the good and nor a supply of the service. So this is the concept of the section 7. Now I am going to explain section 8, composite and mixed supply. The composite or mixed supply concept will arise where a person supplying the good or service, apart from the delivery of the good or service, he is delivering some other good or service. There we can identify the concept of the composite supply. Now whether it is a composite supply or mixed supply, it will be depend upon the case. Apart from the delivery of the good or service, if you are delivering some other good or service which is necessary or it is common in the ordinary course of the business, there we can say that it is as a composite supply. Suppose phone kontunnamma, phone tho paatu naaku charger ivvadam, quite common. Suppose phone పైన రేట్ ఆఫ్ GST 18% అయ్యొచ్చు, చార్జర్ మీద 12% అయ్యొచ్చు. ఇలాంటప్పుడు ఏంటి, ఫోన్తో పాటు చార్జర్ ఇవ్వడం అనేది క్వైట్ కామన్ కాబట్టి ఇది కాంపోజిట్ సప్లై. ఇలాంటప్పుడు రేట్ ఆఫ్ GSTని ఎలా ఐడెంటిఫై చేయాలి సార్? ఇందులో ప్రిన్సిపల్ సప్లై ఏంటి, ప్రిడామినెంట్ నేచర్ ఏంటి, ఫోన్ కొనాలనుకుంటున్నాను, అప్పుడు ఫోన్కి ఏ రేట్ అయితే అప్లికబుల్ అవుతుందో ఆ రేట్ని టోటల్ వాల్యూ పైన చార్జ్ చేయాల్సి ఉంటుందమ్మా. రీజన్, ఇట్ ఈస్ ఏ కాంపోజిట్ సప్లై. సో ఇంకోసారి చెప్తున్నానమ్మా, కాంపోజిట్ సప్లై అంటే గుడ్ సర్వీస్తో పాటు ఇంకో గుడ్ సర్వీస్ని ఇవ్వడం ఆర్డినరీ కోర్స్ ఆఫ్ ద బిజినెస్లో క్వైట్ కామన్ అయితే దాన్ని కాంపోజిట్ సప్లై అంటారు. అలాంటప్పుడు రేట్ ఆఫ్ GST ఎంత అంటేను ప్రిడామినెంట్ నేచర్ ఉన్నటువంటి ప్రిన్సిపల్ సప్లైకి ఏ రేట్ అయితే అప్లికబుల్ అవుతుందో దాన్ని చార్జ్ చేస్తాం. అండ్ సెకండ్ వన్, మిక్స్డ్ సప్లై. మిక్స్డ్ సప్లై కాన్సెప్ట్ విల్ అరైజ్ వేర్ apart from the supply of the good or service, you are supplying any some other good or service which is not in the ordinary course of the business. That means those are artificially bundled. In case of the artificially bundled, you have to ensure the transactions which are involved in the supply. You have to identify different nature of the supplies and the rate of GST applicable to the each and every supply, out of which you have to choose the highest rate of GST. Such highest rate of GST has to be charged on total value of the supply. Suppose నేను మార్కెట్ వెళ్ళి షర్ట్ పర్చేస్ చేద్దాం అనుకున్నానమ్మా, షర్టు, బెల్ట్ అండ్ టైతో నాకు ఒక కాంబో ప్యాక్ కనపడింది. ఇలా కాంబో ప్యాక్ కొన్నాను అనుకోండి, ఇలాంటప్పుడు షర్ట్ పైన రేట్ ఆఫ్ GST 5%, బెల్ట్ మీద 18, టై మీద 28. మరి ఇప్పుడు సేల్ చేస్తున్న పర్సన్ ఏ రేట్తో చార్జ్ చేయాలి చెక్ చేసుకోండి. ఇది కాంపోజిటా, మిక్స్డ్ సప్లై. ఎందుకు షర్ట్తో పాటు రిమైనింగ్ గూడ్స్ సేల్ చేయడం ఆర్డినరీ కోసం బిజినెస్ కాదు, ఆర్టిఫిషియల్లీ బండల్. అప్పుడు ఏం చేయాలి, హైయెస్ట్ రేట్ ఆఫ్ GST ఎంత 28%, వాటిని చార్జ్ చేయడం జరుగుతుందన్నమాట. సో దిస్ ద కాన్సెప్ట్ ఆఫ్ ది సెక్షన్ 8, కాంపోజిట్ అండ్ మిక్స్డ్ సప్లై. ఐ హోప్ యూ ఎంజాయ్డ్ ద వీడియో. థ్యాంక్ యూ. సో అండ్ ఛానల్ని సబ్స్క్రైబ్ చేసుకోండి. ఎవ్రీ చాప్టర్ మీకు రివిజన్గా నేను ప్రొవైడ్ చేస్తాను అండ్ ఫాలో అవుతూ ఉండండి. ఎవ్రీడే మీకు చాప్టర్ రివిజన్ ప్రొవైడ్ చేస్తాను, రైట్? అండ్ ఇఫ్ యూ హ్యావ్ ఎనీ డౌట్ త్రూ Instagram or Facebook, give your comment. I will answer. Thank you.